So let's talk about these 5 fundamentals. We said the first one is stance. So what is a good stance for shooting? Well, we'll tell you right now that there are a few different ones out there that are commonly used, and there's not a bad one or a wrong one to use, and there's not a right one to use. It kind of depends on you, what you're comfortable with, what your experience is. But we are going to teach you one particular stance today. We're going to talk about this stance, why we choose this stance, what the benefits are. And even if this isn't the stance that you've normally used, we would suggest that you at least try it for this particular reason. Using this stance will help you to better evaluate the rest of your fundamentals to see if you're doing something else wrong. So the stance we're going to teach you is called the modified isosceles stance. Sounds complicated. It's actually quite simple, especially you'll see as we break down the steps. So all the modified isosceles stances, you're going to stand first off with your feet shoulder width apart. Your feet are shoulder width apart. You're going to take about a half step back with your strong foot. So if you're right-handed, your right foot is going to come about a half step back. And you're going to want it so that your right foot, if you're right-handed, your right foot, the toe, will be pretty much in line with the heel of your left foot. So it doesn't need to be this dramatic step back, but you don't want to be side by side either. And we'll demonstrate this in a little bit why we're doing this. But again, you want feet shoulder width apart, about a half step back with your strong foot. From here, you want to make sure that your knees are slightly bent. Now, we don't want a deep knee bend, but we don't want them standing locked and rigid either. We want just a slight bend, just so they've got some spring and some cushion in them. So with this position, we're now going to take our arms, we're going to lock them so that our elbows are locked out. Elbows locked out. And the reason we want to do this is, again, this is going to come into play when we start getting into the recoil, because if we start to leave our elbows like this, number one, it doesn't give us a good consistent base for absorbing the recoil because our elbows are going to have some give to them. What we're trying to do is transfer all that recoil energy through our body rather than just through our arms. So we want that elbow locked out. Elbows locked out. The other reason we do this is it gives us a good consistent point of aim at the target. If we're regularly changing what angle we bend our elbows at, we get a different point of aim at the target. If we're locked out every time, our arms don't, on a regular basis, grow and shrink, right? So we're getting a consistent point of aim at the target by locking those elbows out. Finally, what we want to do is we want to stick our butt out. We used to say bend at the hips, but we found that people would start to do this kind of thing and they would just widen out like they were riding a horse. And so we realized that what we need to teach people is to stick the butt out. And people say, well, that feels uncomfortable. I don't want to stick my butt out. Yeah, right. That's why we're telling you to do it, because if we say bend at the hips, you don't do that. So stick the butt out. So if I turn sideways, I've got my strong foot about a half step back. You can see it's not dramatic. And then I'm going to get my knees that little bit of bend, and then I'm going to lock my elbows out. I'm going to kind of roll my shoulders forward and stick my butt out. By doing this, I'm now engaging my target, and I'm in what we kind of call a good fighting stance. So I'm engaged on my target. This is going to give me a great opportunity to absorb the recoil. Let's go ahead and demonstrate this. Okay, so we were talking about the basic fundamentals of marksmanship. So here to help us demonstrate some of them is our lovely assistant Jessica. And Jessica is now going to help us with the stance portion. So what we're going to have Jessica do is we're going to have her assume the traditional isosceles stance. And remember, that's feet shoulder width apart. She's got her feet shoulder width apart there. She's going to keep her knees just slightly bent. They're not going to be a deep bend, but they're not going to be locked straight up. There's going to be a slight bend. From here, what she's going to do is she's going to extend her elbows straight out, locking her elbows for me. Go ahead and extend those. You see she's going to kind of make a fist here for me with her elbows locked. Now what we're going to do is we're going to demonstrate how this is affected by recoil of the shot. So I'm going to give some simulated recoil to her hands here, and watch how this affects her body. So when I give her a little recoil, you'll notice she takes a little step back. There we go, a little step back. And this time go ahead and hold it, Jessica, when you get back there. Go ahead and step back and show that step back and hold it. Now notice when she stepped back, it's not a huge step back. You'll notice if we go ahead and line up the toe of her strong foot with the heel of her support foot. Toe of her strong foot kind of makes a straight line with the heel of her support foot. That would be a really good stance. Now hold that stance and watch what happens when I give a little more recoil. Notice she can absorb that recoil much better than she could before. But now watch what we're going to do to improve it even just a step more. Now what I want you to do, Jessica, is I'm going to have you bend at the hips. And when I say bend at the hips, you'll notice what she's actually doing is she's going to stick her butt out. Because a lot of times you'll tell people, hey, bend at the hips, and they'll kind of start doing this thing like they're riding a horse. So if you say stick your butt out, people say, well, that feels uncomfortable. That's the point. This is a little bit of an uncomfortable position to be in, but you'll see how it affects her ability to absorb recoil. So go ahead and stick your butt out, Jessica. Stick it out a little more. There we go. You'll notice she's bent way at the target now. She's got that foot a half step back, those elbows locked. Now watch the recoil that she can absorb with great ease. You see I'm hitting her significantly harder than I was before, and she's able to absorb that very easily because what she's got now is the weight of her body over the balls of her feet, which gives her the ability to really absorb that recoil. It gives her kind of a counterbalance within her body to take care of that recoil energy coming at her. So you see how we've taken the isosceles stance and modified it into the modified isosceles. And that's a pretty common stance today for a few reasons. One thing that's really good about this stance is for those in professional fields that are wearing ballistic vests, it actually points the area that is designed to absorb rounds towards any threats. So that's one advantage for professionals that are using this stance. The one that comes in the most handy for the average person is that we again call this kind of a fighting stance. For those of you that have done boxing or traditional martial arts, you'll remember that this is kind of the stance that you use when fighting, any kind of fighting like that. You're going to kind of be in a stance where you've got one foot slightly back and your hands ready to go, right? The reason for this is simple. It gives you really good ability to balance, number one, as we saw in the demonstration. Number two, it gives you very good movement because it's very easy to pivot this way or that way and be able to pivot and be ready to do what you got to do. So it really gives you good mobility, good balance. And the other thing that it does is it keeps you, by doing this for your shooting stance, it keeps you in a position where if, say, you were in a self-defense situation, you never really know at what point you may or may not need a firearm because a self-defense situation isn't always deadly force, right? So this allows you to be in your fighting stance, do whatever you got, defend yourself, punch, hit, whatever, and then when the time comes, you go to your firearm and you're in the same stance. Nothing changed because you can see I'm right here in my fighting stance that I was already in. Now I'm in a good shooting stance. So this is a really good stance to get you started and learn the rest of the fundamentals of marksmanship.